Hi everyone, I hope you are doing well. Today is the last episode in the October series of 2020, and I will be talking about my experience of reading Frankenstein for the first time. For those watching for the first time, thanks for checking out my channel. My name is Jolene from Bookworm Adventure Girl. I love to read diverse books, diverse authors and genres, as well as Canadian literature. If this is something that interests you, then please hit subscribe and stick around. Welcome back to those who have watched my videos in the past. If you saw my previous video about horror stories and horror books, you might remember that I said I was going to be talking about two classics that I was reading for the first time that are also considered horror. Well, that's changed just a bit, so now I will be telling you about one classic, which is Frankenstein. I'll have to leave Dracula for another time as I didn't get a chance to read it. I've been busy reading other things and enjoying the Toronto International Festival of Author events. If you stick around until the end, I will tell you a little bit about the festival, which has been so much fun. I'm probably one of the few people who have never seen a Frankenstein movie. Now, of course, I've seen pictures of Frankenstein, and for a long time, like many people, I thought that Frankenstein was the name of the monster. I had seen pictures of the monster, usually with an unbecoming hairstyle. Sometimes he's green, and sometimes with the bolt in his neck. And somewhere along the line, I did learn that Frankenstein was not the monster, and that it was a common misconception. So I was pretty pleased that I knew at least that much, and learning more or reading about Frankenstein never appealed to me. So what made me want to read this book? Well, to be honest, it's because of the Mondays with Margaret series. That's kicking off in just over a week on November the 9th, and I'm so excited to get that series started. The second episode is focused on one poem by Margaret Atwood called Speeches for Doctor Frankenstein. And I've read the poem a few times now and learned about the process of its publishing, which is really fascinating. But I thought maybe if I knew the actual story of Frankenstein, I might be able to get even more out of the poem. So that's why I decided to include reading Frankenstein as part of the October series. So let's get to talking about the book itself. I'm really glad that I read it. I was expecting the book to be more difficult than it was, and it really wasn't hard to get through, so I was a bit surprised at that. And I was also surprised at how sad the story really is. I guess I'll give you a bit of a synopsis while giving you some of my reactions, in case there's anyone out there who maybe like me hasn't read it yet. Just a heads up that this may contain spoilers because I do want to talk about the whole story. A brief synopsis would probably only take me 10 to 15 sentences, so I'm going to go through the story to bring everyone up to speed. And as a reminder for those who have read it, if you don't want spoilers, then please check out some of my other videos and come back to this one when you've read the book. I don't want to ruin it for you. And if you've read it, or if you don't care if there's spoilers, then please keep watching. Okay, so hopefully some of you are still with me. I love how the book starts and ends. It is bookended with letters. And I was pulled in by the introduction, which I think really set the tone or the mood for the story and the book. The introduction is a number of letters written by Robert Walton to his sister Margaret Seville. And Robert is the captain of a ship, and he's on a mission to the North Pole. The ship gets stuck in ice, and Walton's letters tell us about this voyage and his emotions while he's on the ship. And at first I was like, who is this Robert character? And why are we on a ship? I never knew anything about a ship being connected to the story of Frankenstein. But Robert soon meets Victor Frankenstein, who is traveling by dog sled. Robert is not only surprised to see someone, but he helps Victor. Victor is fragile and weak from his journey, and so Robert invites Victor aboard the ship. So I just want to stop for a second to talk about these letters. The letters are very heartfelt, and Robert describes his loneliness and his need for a friend, and that he's looking to have a purpose. It's as if when he sees Victor's body on the ice, his letters have been heard in some mystical way, and what he has asked for, he's been given. Victor and Robert begin talking, and right away it's obvious that Victor is not just suffering from the cold, but that he's incredibly broken and in the greatest depths of despair. After Robert questions Victor, out of curiosity and the starvation for friendship, Victor agrees to tell Robert his story on the premise that he is telling it because he doesn't want Robert to fall into the same traps as him. He wants him to learn from his life, which he considers to be a life of failure. Frankenstein describes his childhood as very idyllic. He grew up in Geneva and was very close to Elizabeth, who is an interesting character because she has several roles. In my edition, she is Victor's cousin, but I know in other editions she is Victor's adopted sister. And within the story, she becomes a mother figure after Victor's own mother dies. And Victor eventually marries her, so she wears a lot of hats in this story. Victor goes to university to study philosophy and chemistry and becomes obsessed with trying to discover the secret of life. He spends years and years researching and becomes consumed in his research. Eventually, he believes he has the answer, and then he spends months making a creature out of old body parts and chemicals. And it's during this time that I have images of him being a mad scientist type. Then one night his creation comes to life. When Frankenstein sees his monstrous creation, he is horrified by him. The monster seems to almost hover over him that night, and Frankenstein can't sleep. He's having nightmares. So he runs out and begins walking the streets. It's now in the wee hours of the morning, and Frankenstein comes across his childhood friend, Henry. When he brings Henry back to his apartment, the monster is gone. So I'm going to stop here again to say that probably due to the very limited knowledge I had of Frankenstein, I had always imagined this to take place in an old, creepy mansion. So I was surprised that Frankenstein lived in an apartment. Okay, so back to the story. The monster's gone, but instead of being relieved, Frankenstein becomes literally sick by what he's done. And he ends up the monster ends up staying near a peasant house, which is where he learns to speak from watching this family, and he tries to befriend them, but they beat him and chase him away. And Frankenstein decides that the best thing for him to do will be to go back home. So he prepares to go back to Geneva, but before he leaves, he receives a letter from his father saying that his brother William has been murdered. And this makes Frankenstein's going home that much more pressing. When Victor is home, he goes through the woods where his brother had been strangled, and he sees the monster. Frankenstein believes it has to be the monster that killed William. The monster plants evidence that causes Justine, who is a family friend, who is then tried and executed. And Victor knows the truth, but he's frightened that if he speaks up, no one will believe him, and everyone will think he's crazy talking about this monster. So now Frankenstein feels more guilty, and he feels that he has the blood of two people on his hands. So he goes to the mountains on vacation, as anyone would in this situation. While he's there, the monster finds him. And the monster initially, who he was kind and gentle, now admits of murdering William. And he did it to cause pain to Frankenstein, and he calls him a cruel creator because he abandoned him. So the monster then begs Victor to make him a mate for companionship. And Victor refuses, but the monster eventually persuades him to do it. So Victor goes to this desolate island and begins working on a female monster. And while working on this monster, Victor sees his first creation watching him from the window. So Victor ends up destroying this new creation, which the monster becomes incredibly angry, and he tells Victor that he will be with him on his wedding night. The monster shows his gentle side and kind side by saving a girl from drowning and by helping some peasants, but they only turn on him and beat him because they are disgusted by his appearance. Victor goes out into the lake to get rid of the second creation he had started, but due to bad weather, he's not able to return back to the island. And in the morning, he finds himself ashore in this place that he doesn't know, and he's quickly arrested. They tell him that he will be tried for a murder, but Frankenstein doesn't know what they're talking about, and they show him the body, and it is his friend Henry. So Frankenstein knows that the monster has killed him too. While in prison, Frankenstein becomes incredibly ill again. Now he recovers, and he's acquitted for the crime. Frankenstein returns to Geneva and makes plans to marry Elizabeth, which is the cousin or adopted sister or mother figure. And he remembers the threat of the monster, and it looms over him. So because of his fear, he sends Elizabeth away for the night and tells her to wait for him. So while Frankenstein waits for the monster to come and kill him, he hears Elizabeth scream. Frankenstein immediately realizes his mistake. The monster was not out to kill Frankenstein, but his new wife. So Victor's father is overcome with grief and dies a short while later. Victor then decides he is going to find the monster and seek revenge. And this is when Victor heads north and eventually meets Robert Walton, who takes him aboard the ship. And at this point, we are caught up to where we started with the story. And the rest of the story is told through more letters written by Robert to his sister. And we learn that Frankenstein did not get better on the ship, but instead became even more ill and died. And he shared his regret of not being able to kill the monster before his own death. And then a few days later, Robert returns to where Frankenstein's body is and finds the monster crying over Frankenstein. And the monster tells Walton of his feelings of immense loneliness and suffering and of remorse. He says that now that his creator has died, his life can come to an end as well. So I was left believing that he's going north to take his own life. But we don't actually know that for sure. We don't know if that's what happens. It's only alluded to. I will say that for a book published in 1818, just over 200 years ago, there are so many universal themes in this book. So I noticed 11 themes to be quite prevalent, but I'm sure there's many more. I'll briefly talk about each one and explain where I think we see this the most. I think one of the biggest ones is ambition. Mostly Victor's ambition in wanting to know the meaning of life and death. And we see this in his work and how it consumes him because of the desire or ambition to make a breakthrough in his field. It overwhelms him. And he's also willing to do it at great cost. And we see ambition in Robert as well, because he wants to make a breakthrough in his field by being the first to set foot on the North Pole. His ambition is a little different, since in the end he does choose survival of his crew and himself over the danger he would have to face. So this theme leads me to the theme of revenge. We know the monster is seeking revenge from his creator for abandoning him and leaving him to suffer, which gets triggered so many times. But we also see revenge with Victor after the monster kills Elizabeth. And it's almost like his new ambition becomes revenge in capturing and killing the monster. The third theme I thought of was secrecy. Again, I think we see this mostly with Victor. He keeps his work secret, he keeps the monster secret, even when it means the death of other people. And I'm sure he sees his secrecy as a way to protect himself and his dangerous knowledge, but it ends up killing people and really ends up destroying him as well. Surprisingly, I also think that family is a theme. The connection of family seems important, and We know that Walton is writing letters to his sister. The Frankenstein family has adopted a couple of people into their family. Victor's father talks to him about the importance of family, and we see the monster attempt to find a sense of family and acceptance, which of course he never does. And another big theme for me was grief and mourning, or maybe even lamenting might be a better word for this. Walton is lamenting to his sister about wanting a friend, and in the end he grieves for Victor, the friend he found, and Victor mourns the death of his mother, father, brother, wife, family friend, and his best friend. And I think he even grieves over the decisions he's made and the life that he dreamt of that never came to fruition. And then the monster also mourns over Victor's death, and there are the various emotions of grief. I mean, he's relieved in some ways because he sought revenge, but Victor was really the only person who had any type of relationship with him. So abandonment is another big one. We see this from the monster's perspective. He feels abandoned mostly by Victor, who left him shortly after creating him. Then he continued to be alienated by people he tried to befriend, and it is the abandonment that caused him to do all of the horrible things that he did, and even though it wasn't who he was initially. The next theme kind of stems from some of these earlier themes, and that's loneliness. So Walton writes of his loneliness, being away from family and on this ship. And we know the monster is lonely. He even begs for Victor to create a companion for him. So Victor becomes lonely because he ends up losing all of the people in his life. And this again shows the importance of family in the book too, that people need people. The emotion of despair is quite heavy in this story too. When Walton finds Victor, Victor describes how deep this emotion is for him. And I think the monster is in despair as well, because I don't think he can see any hope in his situation. So suffering, after talking about grief and mourning, abandonment, loneliness, and despair, it only makes sense that suffering is an obvious theme in the story as well. The monster specifically talks about his suffering to explain why he has done the things that he has done. His suffering has caused him to do all of these horrible deeds. And Victor's suffering is very self-pitying, in my opinion. He is too ridden with guilt and self-blame that he cannot see hope for anything more and believes he deserves to suffer in some way. Running from consequences is the theme that I think is probably the greatest fault alongside ambition that Victor has. He doesn't face what he has done. He doesn't own up to it, and every time there are consequences, he runs. So he goes back to Geneva. He goes on vacation in the mountains. He goes back to Geneva. He goes to an island, and he ends up dying in the north with a stranger. And the last theme that I think is another big one is judgment. The monster's outward appearance is said to be grotesque and horrific. People are immediately scared of him based on his looks, even his creator. But not one person, including Victor, takes the time to find out what was beneath that exterior. And they would have known this monster to be very kind and very gentle, but it was easier for everyone to be afraid of the unknown. And in our world today, I think we can learn from this theme especially, instead of judging others because of their race, the color of their skin, their culture, the way they dress, their religion, their sexual identity. Wouldn't it be a better world if we took the time to really get to know people? And on that note, I will just say that there is probably so much about this book that we could still talk about, and I hope that if you have the chance to read this, if you haven't already, that you give it a go. There were a couple of parts that were a bit slower for me. I do think it could have been told in less pages, but maybe the emotional intensity would have been lost if that was the case. So I mentioned earlier that I didn't get Dracula read. Perhaps it's a blessing in disguise because there was plenty to talk about with Frankenstein. But one of the things that has been taking up some of my time is the Toronto International Festival of Authors, or as we affectionately call it, TIFA. I went to some of the events last year for the first time, which meant traveling back and forth to Toronto several times within the 10 or 11 days of the festival. It was great because you not only got to see the authors and events, but most, if not all, did book signings, so you also got to meet them and chat a bit. So the personal aspect is missing this year, but there were so many great events to choose from, and I've enjoyed them so far. So this year's festival is all online due to COVID, and the theme is appropriate. It's bringing a new world into focus. The good thing about being online is that it's free, but you can make a donation, which I think is totally worth it. I didn't have to travel as much, so that saved me on some cash. If you didn't catch the events live, you have access to them afterwards. And this makes them more accessible and made it possible to go to several more events than I normally would have. This year's festival ends on November 1st, so I still have a few more events to participate in. And then I will be sharing with you some of the events that I attended, and I'll talk about the authors that I heard and maybe talk a little bit about their books. There are actually so many events that I will most likely have to do those videos in 2, maybe even 3 parts. I've really enjoyed the events I've been part of so far. I'm so excited to tell you about them, and there's definitely lots of great books as well to learn about. So please let me know in the comments if you have read Frankenstein, what your thoughts are about the book or the movies, or what other books you might be reading at the moment. Also, if you have any comments or questions about the festival, I'd be happy to see those as well. Thanks again for watching. Have a wonderful day, and don't forget to make every day an adventure.